We're now going to move on to the hem and the side seam. Now I've already prepared my fabric up to a point just to show you. I will be demonstrating on some white fabric so that you can see what I've done. But I sew my hem first and then I close the side seam. So you'll note on this side you can see the hem is all sewn up, and then only do I go to that side seam. When I sew my side seam first and then I try and do this hem and I try and transition on this curve from the front to the back, there's always going to be a need for me to pull on that hem. As you can see, and I think let's go to this side, this one is more clear. As you can see, as I've pressed it in and I've sewn it, can you see that angle that has happened on my hem? Now sometimes it's not as prominent, but this one has really made quite a prominent angle for me. Now if I had to sew this after I've closed the side seam, I would have had to pull it to be able to go around that curve. So again, that is not a really good way of sewing it because I'm stretching the fabric. I might be getting puckers there as well. Now if we look at what I've done here, look how beautiful that finish is. So you can see it has really given me a very good transition coming again from front to back on that curve. So I've gone and I've sewn my side seam afterwards, and I've overlocked and pressed it as well. So all I will do really here now is just tack it by hand. But before we move on to talk about the side seam any further, I just wanted to show you on a piece of scrap fabric what I have done so that you can see my overlock stitch that I have there and how I've pressed it. Now I go and I overlock first, then I would fold it in and I would give it my first press, then I would fold it in again and I would do the next pressing on that hem. Now sometimes what happens is that when we are pressing or when we want to sew, you will have a little bit of excess fabric. Now again, as we can see, when I'm trying to lie this flat, can you see it's almost too much fabric in that section? Can you see it's almost making a little bit of a wave there? So what I like to do, I take my overlocker stitch and I go on that needle stitch and I go and pull it in a little bit, and I just go and pull it in basically where this curve is, just from here to there, and I can really manipulate it and bring it in just a little bit so that it will pull flat on that area. Now what is nice doing it with your overlocker stitch or your serger stitch is, can you see where my stitching line is, or that needle line is? It is really on this curve, closest to this curve. So automatically when I am pulling in a little bit on that area, this is the area that it's going to be pulling in ever so slightly. I'm not going to do it excessively. It's not needed with this narrow hem that I'm going to do. Now you've got to find that thread for the needle. Don't grab the looper thread. If we look at this, it almost looks like that in between stitch, that as if that is going to be my needle thread. That is not the needle thread. Where this looper comes down, that looper thread comes down in between there, that is where I have my needle thread. Now as you can see there, that thread over there, I've got the looper thread. So I'm just going to bring it closer so you can see I've got that thread there. Now all I'm going to do, I'm really just going to be pulling on it, and I just want to bring it in a little bit on that section. If we pull too much, it's always easy to just go pull it back again. So I just want to grab it. Can you see how it's just bringing it in on that area? I'm holding it down with my finger here. I don't want to be bringing it in there. So I'm really holding onto the stitches there. Just again grabbing my thread. And then I can go and I can really move that around. I can just take that gathering and with my nail I just move it around a little bit. Now I can go and check and see if I'm happy with that. And that has actually already pulled it down very flat. Can you see that now? So I might just decide to go a little bit more. So I'm just going to pick it up again and I'm just holding on there. Can you see how it literally just pulls it in? And I'll hold on to there. I'll shift it around a little bit again with my nail until I'm happy with that. And now when I fold again, I'll go and double check, and let's just push that in. That is actually so nice and flat over there now. If you find that while you're sewing that it's gathered in too much, you can always pull a little bit. That needle or that thread of the overlocker will actually shift on as we are sewing it. So I'm just going to now pin it from this side. You can see I've already gone and I have done my pressing on here. Don't try and sew a curved hem without pressing it. So I'm just going to, again, just make sure that's folded in. I'm just going to do 1 or 2 pins so that it just keeps it in place so that I can sew. Now, when I do any of my hems, I like to go to about between a 3 and a 3.5 stitch length. I just find it always looks better for me when I'm doing my hems. So I'm just going to do that area. Again, let's have a look there. Can you see how beautifully flat it's pulled it in for me? Just by pulling on that serger or your overlocker thread. So with the narrow hem that I've done, you can see because it's folded in with the overlocker stitch in and then again, I'm just going to do a narrow seam. So I'm going to use my 1/4 inch foot and I'm going to use the side of that 1/4 inch foot. So I'm going to get a finished seam stitch of 6 millimeters. And I'm just going to bring it up again. And I'm just going to make sure that I'm guiding it next to my foot. So I just want to bring it in and I'm holding on to my threads I've got at the back just to get going, and I just want to show you when we are going around the curve. Now when I'm working again, I am holding this nice and flat. This hand is guiding on the side because as soon as I get to the curve, this hand is going to start pulling my fabric. And you can see this hand is starting to pull that fabric. I might be going a little skew because I am sitting so far away from my machine. Usually with any of these stitching, I'm very close up to my machine. Can you see how I'm starting to pull that? And what you will find is that when you are coming around the curve, if you need to, then make sure you stop with the needle down, lift that presser foot, and then you put it down again and carry on sewing. So let's have a look now at the final finish. So you can see that I have a very smooth curve. I have a very flat curve as well, which is important. If I was pulling on my fabric, I would have had a waving happening on here. Now, once I sew my hems, I do go and I press it again. That actually just helps set the stitch in my fabric as well. Now, if we turn to the inside, and I do apologize, my stitches look a little bit skewed there. I think I've got the wrong needle in for this fabric. But can you see if I hold it like this? Can you see on that curve? Because I pulled it in with that overlock stitch, I do have a very, very smooth finish on that side. There's no puckering, there's no waving whatsoever again on this inside as well. So that is really the finish that I am looking for. Now going back to my top, you can see this beautiful curve that I have. Everything is lying flat. So this is really the result that we want. We don't want any stretching on here. We don't want any creases happening in that seam line that we have. So in order to sew the side seam, now I've already done this side. I want you to start pinning for me on the hem. Don't start from the underarm point. So when we are going to pin our side seam now, I want you to, I've got those out of the way there, let's just put it there. I want you to make sure that you are lining up this section perfectly. So I'll make sure the edge of my hem is lined up, and I will go and put my pin in this way to keep it in place. And then when I start sewing, I'm going to make sure that my needle is right in that point over there so that I can just do one reverse stitch and carry on up again. If you pin it, I'm going to pin it there. I'm going to then go to my underarm. I will pin my underarm. And then from there, I would lift it up and I will start pinning from the center. So you can see I always like to work the edges, then I go center and then I'll go in between. If we work with the soft fabric and I just pin from one side, I do find that I don't always match on one of my edges. So that is really just my way of pinning it. And you can see I can really manipulate my fabric. There we go. I'm just going to give one more pin on this side. So when you are going to sew this now for me, please pick it up from the hem and sew all the way up. And then once you've overlocked it, now in this area sometimes, like I mentioned, I do go and I tie off my overlock stitch. But with this now, I really wanted a perfect finish over there. So I took my needle and I put my serge or my overlock thread through this and I then just pulled it through. Now when I do this, I make sure that the needle goes between the two layers of fabric. I don't just pick it up under the stitches and grab it. Let's just see if I can put it there. I don't just go and put it under the stitches. I try and place it in between that two layers of fabric and I bring it all the way. And you can see, you can't see my needle on this side of the fabric or that side. I always go and I pull this thread so that it lies between the fabric. And then once I get there and I've got that point that is left, all I'm going to do is I'm just going to nip it off there. So look at that finish that we have on our side seam as well. So go ahead now, finish your hem for me. Please remember, press as you go. Don't just go and sew the hem. You've got to make sure that it is pressed flat. You're going to sew it for me. Then you're going to do your side seams and finish the side seams for me as well.